You're not really ready until you're safe. Summer safely and drive calm.
Trying to quit smoking? You don't have to quit alone. Way to Quit is here if you need help, have questions, or just need to talk. Tips, resources, and coaches are just a phone call away. Call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. That's 1-800-QUIT-NOW or visit waytoquit.org.
The June Heat Wave. In-depth coverage on KSL News Radio.
It's just been so hot. And maybe I shouldn't have been doing all this stuff, Dave, but the last week I've had 5 hour-long crazy workouts at the gym, hike, paddleboarding, yard work, and then late last week I had a 3-day headache on the top of my head, and I wondered, is this a sign of heat exhaustion?
You think?
I don't know. I need to get an expert on the line, though.
Drink some water.
I try to diagnose via Google, and that never ends well for me.
There's nothing that a doctor loves more than to hear, hey, I was on Google, and I put my symptoms into the web browser, and this is what I found. They're like, basically medical school.
Drink more water. So I'm worried about me, but I know you've been worried about firefighters, Dave.
Well, we keep hearing this.
Yeah.
We've had so many fires and structure fires. And as we report people that have gone to the hospital, oftentimes it's this firefighter is being treated for heat exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And as if it's not hot enough, as these firefighters and all of their gear are fighting these fires for, hours and hours, it doesn't surprise me that they're suffering heat exhaustion. So I want to find out more about that.
And my son's a firefighter. So as a mom, I want to know what's going on with him. So this will be all about me right now. Dr. Andy Doré. He's an emergency room physician with Intermountain Healthcare. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, I'm feeling better. I started to drink lots of water. I took a few naps, and and obviously the temperatures have cooled a lot. But I did wonder if that headache I was having on the top of my head day after day was any sort of a sign of just too much heat exposure. I don't think it was heat stroke, but could it have been something like heat exhaustion?
Yeah, quite possibly you could have been having early signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion with that prolonged exposure to the heat and your workouts and paddleboarding and everything else that you were doing last week.
It was a busy
quite
week.
Possibly. A little bit dehydrated.
What are the first signs that we have to watch for?
For heat exhaustion, I'd be looking out for any changes in mental status, confusion, muscle cramps, nausea, vomiting, just kind of a feeling of uneasiness or just feeling a little bit off. And if it progresses anything beyond that, then you need to seek medical attention immediately.
So when does it switch over from heat exhaustion to heat stroke?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a little bit of an overlay there. It's more like a continuum. So it becomes heat stroke once the body is completely unable to regulate one's temperature. So typically with heat stroke, we'd see core body temperatures over 104 degrees and alterations in mental status, and then the organs begin to fail. So heat stroke is a life-threatening condition. Heat exhaustion is more the early signs, and your body's giving you this warning, better get out of the heat, better start cooling off, or it can progress to more serious heat stroke.
How much of it is tied to hydration?
That's a good question. Fair amount. Hydration certainly will help avoid that progression to heat stroke, because sweating, and particularly in this dry environment, the evaporative cooling plays a huge role in regulating our body temperature. So if you're dehydrated, you don't, can't sweat sufficiently, and therefore you cannot cool your body the way you should be able to.
When I would take my kids to the pediatrician for their well care checkups, we would talk about, because they were in sports, we would talk about, drinking Gatorade versus drinking water. And in Dave's case, he drinks a ton of Diet Coke. What should we...
Hydration is hydration, right, Doc?
I'm with you, Dave. I'm with you.
Dr. Doré, what should we be drinking?
Really, water is fantastic. Gatorade and other sports drinks suffice. alcohol and other stimulants, so caffeine, can affect our ability to regulate our body temperature. So if we're worried about this, those probably shouldn't be our first choices as a primary means for hydration. But to let Dave off the hook a little bit, Diet Coke is wet.
Thank you.
That is a true story.
Could the news even function without caffeine? And I know that rounds, you couldn't do rounds without a little boost of caffeine.
Yeah, you know that hospitals run on caffeine too. So,
so how much water a day is it? I've heard lately like 80 ounces of water, but that does feel like you'd be swimming in water.
Yeah, it depends greatly on one's activity level and their exposures. So I heard you mention that your son's a firefighter.
Yes.
He's drinking 80 ounces or more every single day, wearing that heavy equipment, fighting fires outside in the elements. But, for me, working inside in an air-conditioned environment in the emergency, I probably don't need that much. And so the guideline is always to drink to thirst. For typical people, your thirst mechanism will guide you, and you don't need to push it beyond that.
Touching on those firefighters, we keep hearing about these firefighters that are being treated at the hospital for heat exhaustion. Is this just an entirely different level, and how do you recommend firefighters kind of help themselves out?
Boy, they're facing a tough situation wearing that heavy protective gear. Not only is the environment that they work in very warm, fighting a fire, but with the current heat wave that we've been having, they're not able to get out of that hot environment as easily. So I think that they should go into this environment as hydrated as possible, avoid stimulants the best that they can, alternate shifts or do whatever they can to spell each other so that they can take breaks to cool off, and really watch out for each other. And at the first sign of kind of those symptoms we discussed earlier, nausea, vomiting, muscle cramps, confusion or dizziness, they really need to spell themselves and watch out for each other.
How quickly can something like this set in, a heat exhaustion? Is this, if you're feeling completely fine, how quickly can it start affecting you?
Yeah, I guess that probably depends on the ambient temperature and then one's underlying adaptations and maybe other medical comorbidities or medications that they're taking. So for the very young and the very old, it can set in very rapidly. We're talking potentially minutes. But for maybe the more general population, those that have a little bit more fitness or are more acclimated to the heat, they can sustain a fairly high workload in warm temperatures before those symptoms would set in. So kind of got to know your body and know your situation.
A lot of folks I know, and including myself, just because it's really hot outside doesn't mean we want to stay inside. So is there other things that we should be doing outside? Seek shade or spend less time outside? What are your best tips for this dog as it continues to get hotter and hotter in the months of July and August?
Yep, I'm with you. I'm not going to stay inside all day. So if you want or need or have to go outside because you just can't sit still, you want to exercise or your job requires it, being outside early or later in the evening after the sun goes down or early in the morning in the shade of the Wasatch Mountains would be a good time to do it before it really gets too hot. And if you have to be outside in the middle of the day, wearing appropriate kind of light, loose-fitting clothing, again, approaching the day as hydrated as possible, and then taking breaks to get out of the sun, going into the shade, finding a sprinkler or water or some way to cool yourself down. Those are all good ideas.
Dr. Dore, thank you so much for joining us from Intermountain Healthcare. Debbie, I love that advice of starting early and going late.
Because you worked outside. You worked outside.
Yeah, I was working on sprinklers, repairing sprinklers, the never-ending battle. But I'll tell you this, I mowed a lawn at 9 a.m. the other day. I've never mowed a lawn at 9 a.m. Because I was just trying to avoid that peak sun in the middle of the day. And I'll tell you, it was wonderful.
You felt like it was
9 a.m. is a great time to mow the lawn.
When do you normally mow it?
I like to do it in the middle, like at 4 o'clock when it's truly miserable.
That's the heat of the day.
Yeah.
That's the hottest point in the day.
I'm not a smart man.
Hey, straight ahead, in our 10 o'clock hour, we're going to dive into 3 aspects of President Biden's pledge to fight violent crime that I found very unusual, and I'm not sure his plan is going to work.
I'm Dave Cawley, host of the podcast Cold. Our brand new second season focuses on the 1985 disappearance of a woman named Joyce Yost. Hear her voice for the first time. That's Cold Season 2, exclusively on Amazon Music.